Good evening, everyone. I'm doing my ritual, my evening ritual, which is to come out and sit on the patio, and got a nice little gazebo over the top with a metal roof. So when it rains, it sounds awesome, like you think it would. It's a great place to nap. It's also a great place to think, I think. It's I have my cigar, I have my beverage, and I sit here and I get philosophical. And I've been having some thoughts, and this is kind of the MO of my life, the modus operandi, in that I worked for a couple years in science and technology and clinical IT, and get my nerd flex on and get that nerd flex paycheck. But it no matter how much fuel it puts in my tank, I always end up giving more, and so over time it starts to deplete. So I try to do some Reiki and some yoga and some Tai Chi, meditation, journaling. If that doesn't really get it, then sometimes I've got to do some writing, like a gratitude journal, or sometimes just vent and get all that vitriol out. Then when I'm outside and having a nice little fire, when it's not 9,000 degrees outside, it's a good place to have like my own little mini despacho ceremony. Just create a little love bubble and chuck that thing in the fire and send it into the bubble, and then send the bubble out into the ether. So I'm in that place. I'm starting my 5th week now of unemployment. Still no benefits, so thanks, North Carolina, appreciate that. But my time as a contractor, almost 7 years, I basically taught myself to pay myself first and to have about 2-3 months in reserve. So I'm riding on that. And I'm still doing the stuff throughout the day of, applying to jobs and, tweaking my resume for, every instance where I need to kind of do a pivot, because after 22 years in the industry, I've done a few things. So sometimes I need to emphasize some things and de-emphasize others. If anyone has told you different, I would challenge that. Every job description is a potential, and your resume needs to be augmented to fit that potential. The resume gets you the interview, but the interview gets you the job. So still working that. That's still my 9-to-5 hustle, so to speak. But I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but I've felt this way, man, even since adolescence. Nighttime is just a different time. And I think what's going on is humanity, in the sense of most people are asleep, or at least they're kind of winding down. Maybe the cacophony of the natural world, or maybe the psychic energy that goes on throughout the day. It's noise. But if I find myself up at 4 or 5 a.m. and it's nice and quiet, even the crickets and frogs and cicadas are quiet then, which they're not now, as you can probably hear. But here it is, about 10 o'clock. People are winding down. You got the end of day dog walkers out doing their thing. But this is when the muse comes for me. And again, I don't know whether I'm musing. I don't know if I'm channeling. I don't know what's going on, but new thoughts are coming in, and then like a mental chew toy, I just kind of gnaw them a little bit. Sometimes I get a little squeak out of it, and sometimes I don't, and I come back and gnaw on it later. All that is preamble just for me to say, next week I'm doing a presentation at a local bookstore here in Raleigh, solely holistic. And I gave a talk last weekend that had to do with a little bit of out-of-body experiences, but it really was talking about the near-death experience. And, you know, I worked with ions from 2011 to 2015, worked with assist from 15 to 18. I took a little break for a while, and then about a month ago, maybe 8 weeks ago, I had a dream. Archangel Michael is standing at the foot of my bed, and he's tapping the wrist. Like, come on, buddy. It's time to get out of the pool, or time to get in the pool. Time to do something. I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. And so my response was to go to an IONS event that, you know, I haven't been to one probably since maybe 16, 17. It was definitely pre-COVID, so not really sure. But anyway, it was a lovely experience. The person who was hosting or was the speaker that day was Roland Waters. And I'm talking about the Durham chapter of the IONS meet. We're third Friday every month. Check your local listings. But it was nice to see Roland. He and I have a very small but shared history. And he was, you know, talking about his near-death experience, but then afterwards he had an energy share. And during that energy share, we sat in a circle and held hands. Nobody was singing Kumbaya. No one smelled of patchouli, so it was, you know, relatively safe. But while we were sitting there, the person who was holding my left hand said it felt like I had like an electric motor in my hand, and there was just this buzz going on. The person holding my right hand was like, I just couldn't believe how hot his hand was, and that my whole body warmed up while holding his hand. And that was the first time for me where, because I've been doing Reiki almost 25 years now, and, you know, usually what's coming out of the left is what's coming out of the right, you know. There's, you know, multiple taps on the beer wall, but only one beer being poured, so to speak. And I had two things going on, so I thought that was really interesting. For me personally, it was just a nice, calm, relaxing sensation. The physical sensation was not there. Of lying on a pool raft in a pool in a warm summer's day and just being totally relaxed. That emotional relaxation was where my head was while sitting in a chair in a, you know, church, you know, gathering room. But it got me thinking. It was like, okay, you know, maybe this is what Michael's talking about, is that, you know, your job's going away. We're going to give you a little gap to, you know, turn on the switches again. Because I've done this before. I had my near-death experience in 2011. 12, I wrote a book. 15, I started a skin cream company, an organic skin cream company for cancer survivors. In 17, I published my second book. And all of these things made a difference to people, but they were never the engine that I was looking for to not be in pharma. Because I'd really like to dedicate my life to this, but my concern is that I can't pay the bills. And my experience has been that It's almost like the 1% of society does really well and the 99% are kind of struggling by. Of the people that have spiritual awakenings, I mean, I don't have the numbers to prove this, but it just feels like 99% of the people still struggle. And it's like, why would you hamstring people if you give them the power to do something, but then hamstring them? It's almost like the movie Amadeus, where Salieri was, why would you give me the ability to play? Why would you give me the ability to recognize genius, but then also not give me the ability to achieve my highest, greatest potential? So I struggle with that. I'm still trying to figure that one out. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's trying to figure that out. And right now, my thought process is all of these things are going to be aspects of something that I'll be doing. And so I needed that experiential learning, because I'm not one to learn by reading as much as I am learning through experiential knowledge. I have to touch the stove. I have to put the butter knife in the socket. Does it make sense? No. Is it who I am? Yes. And that's why in the previous videos you probably like, oh, so he decided to participate in an exorcism. Oh, he decided to remote view the moon when a CIA officer said, don't do that. Yeah, maybe I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed after a while, but curiosity. Yeah, curiosity killed the cat, but he died happy, Again, all this preamble to kind of get to a thought that's been percolating in my head for the past couple of days. I mean, I knew I had to give this talk next week in regards to OBEs, and it was, the last week was the near-death experience with a sprinkling of spiritually transformative experience and a sprinkling of out-of-body experience, and how it's the umbrella, because an NDE is an out-of-body experience, but not all out-of-body experiences are NDEs. Spiritually transformative experiences, fasting, prayer, meditation, satori, orgasm, pharmaceuticals, shamanic practices, Wiccan practices, past life regression, abduction experiences. These are all subcategories of the out-of-body experience. And so my thought was, this is kind of an introductory class, me getting to know the audience in the area and them getting to know me. So, hey, here it is. Here's an out-of-body experience, and here's all the different subtypes that, you could be, fall into. The other thing is they all have a PTSD component. As a nurse, I learned what a PTSD treatment protocol was and realized, hey, I need this. But then as I looked at that template for both a person who needs it as well as a person who has to deploy it occasionally, this template came to mind. And then I noticed this template fits in different places. I mean, I started with NDEs, and then I went to STEs, and then I went to MUFON and looked at abductees. And I already knew from my nurse training about soldiers with PTSD and rape victims with PTSD. So again, I just, you give someone a hammer and everything looks like a nail. I had this PTSD template in my mind, and it was like all these different subgroups are being disassociated for one reason or another, through one method or another. But again, the paradigm usually is that a person is in one state, they have a timeout of sorts, and then after that timeout, they've been bumped up a notch. And nearly to a person, they come back with an improved sense of self and a desire to help humanity, They see through the bullshit of materialism and consumerism, mass marketing, and that crap. But okay, we're going to put a pin in that. All right. So everything I talked about, the out-of-body experience. The other thing I wanted to do at this thing next week is I want to give them a sampling of remote viewing and give them a sampling of an out-of-body experience through drumming. I don't know if I can get everybody, but if I can get half the people that show up, at least we'll generate enough buzz, and that the people who had the experience can talk to those that did not. And it's not just me saying it, it's other people who had the experience. And as we know, when you start having a conversion process, you have the desire to do some, to be an evangelist for that, which, depending upon the audience, is well received or not well received. Get off my front porch. So, and I personally, again, I've done things that I probably shouldn't have done, but I did so out of curiosity. But of the subsegments of out-of-body experiences, I've had the NDE, I've had 2 shared NDEs, I've had a spiritually transformative experience, I've had past life regression to the point where I've recovered 12 lives. I've done some shamanic stuff with drumming and chanting, and also some remote viewing. And in that remote viewing, that's where I encounter my ET experience and my transdimensional experience. So that's my pedigree, that's my outline for an OBE. Stick a pin in it. Now we're going to flip to something else. We'll talk to you about a book. It's a book called Future Shock. And it was written by a dude named Alvin Toffler. I think he was born in 28, passed away in 2016. Everyone talks about Kurzweil being a futurist, or Steve Jobs, or I can't remember his first name. The last name is Case, who was created AOL. Ted Turner. These guys are futurists as well within their domain, but still, where do these futurists get their ideas? And all the guys I just mentioned, Toffler was the guy that they cite. So I went digging a little bit on him, other than being a writer and a futurist. He was a professor. He started out, again, wanting to acquire experiential knowledge. So he started being a welder and a day laborer. That led to him getting to do some writing for labor papers. That kind of moved him up into the political sphere. Started doing correspondence through the White House. Moving on through time, he saw the situation we're in now with respect to technology is moving forward at such a clip that people can't keep up. And if you've ever heard the saying that a man's reach extends further than his grasp, AI, I think, is an example of that, where our reach, we can create AI, we can create some really interesting things to do with AI, but our grasp is lacking. If it were unleashed with no controls in place, and specifically my concern is with no understanding of empathy or sympathy, and without a ground truth, and without some sort of human in the loop benchmarking to make sure that there is empathy in its decision-making process, and let it become, let it become our better angels. I think it was Abraham Lincoln that was talking about if we could reach out to our better angels, or reach within to find our better angels so that we treat each other better. I think this is a situation where there's been other examples too, but where our reach has exceeded our grasp, and the cadence just keeps getting faster. And the people who feel disaffected, I think, really showed up en masse for the 2016 election. I've got family members and cousins that are blue-collar workers, and they're frustrated. And before we stopped talking to each other because of who was running for president and yada yada, I finally got some real words and real information as opposed to talking points. And to just kind of summarize, Grandpa was a carpenter, and he took care of his family and 6 kids that way. And then Dad was a carpenter and, raised my brother and I just fine. And when I become a carpenter, I'm living in my parents' basement because I can't afford a house. And my wife, who is a CNA, makes less money taking care of people than what she would make as a cashier at Whole Foods. So again, our society is not reflecting the benefits of people who are, have emotional intelligence, or I think what he called it was emotional and affectional intelligence. The world just cannot run on computers and binary or qubits. So anyway, his book, Future Shock, let me get my notes here. As of 2021, there were 6 million copies in print over 50 countries. He coined the term information overload. He predicted the use of personal computers, cloning, and again, this is before 1980s. So yeah, computers still took up whole rooms, to kind of give you a place and time. But he was talking about personal computers, he was talking about cloning, he was talking about the internet, he was talking about cable TV, he talked about communications with respect to having a personal communication device. I don't think he understood cell phone. I haven't dug that deep into his books. Also talked about an accelerated military, the military hardware and the military capacity, military knowledge. Kind of is a predecessor to the military industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about, or some folks like Ancient Alien folks will talk about how there's actually 2 different societies and there's been a bifurcation, and that if you're in the military or in that loop, you have a different reality because you have a different set of technology and a different set of skill sets that are necessary or required. What he talks about in Future Shock talks about what happens to a society when change happens too fast, hence the term that he coined, information overload. But a couple of the things that he talked about was societal confusion. I think we can tick that box. The breakdown of normal decision making. I think we can go ahead and look at what's on TV and what's going on in finance and government and pharmaceuticals and food supply and Russia. Yeah, we can tick that box too, in my opinion. The breakdown of civility. Yeah. He says that the dawn of a new civilization, again, this is future talk predicting this, predicting the dawn of a new civilization that doesn't know how to learn. And he specifies that, he goes into a little more detail in the excerpt that I read, that it's not that people won't know how to read and write, they won't have that degree of illiteracy, but there is no active discovery, there is no trial and error. It's, I need to learn something, like the Matrix, I need to learn something, so I jack into the information stream, I download it into my brain, and then I can do it. Well, we've got a little hiccup in there, but the second most used search engine is YouTube. So I know I've done it many times. This whole gazebo I'm sitting under, I've never built a gazebo before, but went online, watched 4 or 5 videos, took notes, and then, gripped it and ripped it. So, and it's been through a few storms, so I think I'm okay, knock on wood. The other thing that they talk about was the resulting change would, in this new civilization, would also result in a change of consciousness. In that there is going to be more disassociation, more confusion, more irrationality, more malaise, and this was a new word on me, demassification. This sounds like something you would make up if you, are drunk, high, and trying to play Scrabble with too many letters. But it's actually a sociological term, and it basically is the collapse of society when larger groups are broken down into smaller and smaller subunits. And again, the thought that came to my mind is divide and conquer. And as we see, it's like, we don't just have Republicans anymore. We have Trumplicans and regular Republicans. We don't have Democrats anymore. We have Democrats and we have woke Democrats. Again, and just in different genres, whichever you're more familiar with, I'm sure you can look and see that, yeah, there is kind of a systemic breakdown of society into smaller and smaller echo chambers that, once people get in and hear their own music, they don't leave. This is a quote that really spoke to me. We must search out totally new ways to anchor ourselves in this new consciousness, new civilization. For all the old roots, religion, nation, community, family, profession, are now shaking under the hurricane impact of this accelerated threat. Progression should not be a threat. And again, if there was something in place to pull back on the reins, OpenAI, partially financed through, what's his face, that wrecked Twitter. I'm having a brain fart. It's those type of situations where when the pursuit of money and meeting shareholders' expectation supersedes the safety of the people they serve. It's the equivalent of, again, I'm going back to pharmaceutical research, that's my bailiwick. It's the equivalent of skipping preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, and just going right into, hey, we created this drug, let's just stick it in people's arms. And say what you will about COVID, because I know that's going to be a dog whistle for some. I participated in COVID research, and I can tell you that one of the biggest things I've heard that people espouse when they're concerned was it was rushed. The technology was rushed. There wasn't enough safety being done. I've worked on Zika. I've worked on HIV. I've worked on some stuff for the DoD. I would tell you, I have never had a microscope shoved so far up my ass than when I was working with COVID. And there were some things going on that make it so. Usually when you're, so my role, clinical data manager, I may be in charge of a molecule, and there may be 4, 5, 8 studies running concurrently. So because I have knowledge of that molecule, I'm kind of like the subject matter expert for that, and so that's why they've got me on several different studies. Or I may be in a position where I'm an expert builder, and so I will work on multiple therapeutic flows. And the therapeutic area, for example, cancer is a predominant one, oncology is another one, or I'm sorry, hematology, endocrinology, diabetes, and cardiovascular. I mean, those are the big 4. Those are the ones that make the most money. Those are the ones that I did the most builds on. And again, the oversight was magnified. The therapeutic areas collapsed. Everything was put on hold. The only thing that mattered was getting the COVID vaccines out. And so folks like myself, I didn't have 5 or 6 different builds going on concurrently. I didn't have 6 or 7 studies under one molecule. I had one study, one build, and multiple meetings out the wazoo. So I can tell you my experience is very different than what some people have reported, but I'm an N of 1, so what do I know? But again, with my job, I've encountered AI, and a year later, it was ChatGPT, and so totally disrupting, and trying to maintain my normal job workload as well as be a subject matter expert for AI, going from SAS to Python, and then trying to understand ChatGPT and how to integrate that into our systems. There just weren't enough hours in the day. I just could not keep up. And that's one of the reasons why I don't have a job now, was that the position I represented was business transformation, and the cadence was just so quick. It just was greater than one person. So that is the future shock for me. And I think if we look out at the landscape of AI, ML, machine learning, ChatGPT, that we're going to see much more episodes of future shock. And that as people, programmers are literally working themselves out of a job. Again, a year and a half ago, it was AI, and then a year ago, it was ChatGPT. We got to a point where we can use ChatGPT to convert SAS to Python. It took programmers to create that Rosetta Stone, but once it was created, we were able to get rid of almost half of our FTEs for programming because of that conversion. So ironically, some programmers are working themselves right out of a job. And eventually, there won't be that need. Just like we no longer need wagon wheel makers, we no longer need lamplighters. We no longer have, the milkman making milk deliveries. Cloth diapers and nappies are no longer, coming to our homes. I mean, there's the niche, snobby, effete people who, my toddler only wears Gucci bamboo fibered nappies that are delivered by Unicorn. Okay, fine. There's going to be those folks. That's not mainstream. And again, this is just the first ripple of the stone that has been dropped in the water with ChatGPT, and there's more coming. Between what I learned at IBM and what I learned at my last employment, it's a tidal wave, and it's going to hurt. So, put a pin in that now. One more pin. Imagine a terrarium that is the size of a football stadium, a dome football stadium. And imagine all the doors are sealed shut. And within the football field are small garden plots where people have come in, they've planted whatever plants they want to plant. And again, it's an enclosed environment like a terrarium is. It's its own little, ecosystem. But just for the mental visualization, let's say 10 farmers came in, planted 10 lots of varying crops, and then they closed the door, sealed it up, and you've got artificial lighting for the light, you've got sprinkler systems for the water. It's an enclosed environment, so there's no other environmental conflicts going on. And people have been making terrariums for a very long time, and successful. And sometimes you got to crack it open, spritz some more water, add some more nutrients, and kind of like make sure the balance is correct. But if you got the balance correct and the right components, you never have to open that sucker. 100 years. What if the Earth was a terrarium? Buckle up, kids, for the what ifs. Should have said that first. So you've got this ecosystem. It's closed off. I don't know if man was running around yet, or precursor to man, or what's what. Again, I've been thinking. This isn't fully flushed out. That's why I said my porch is for being philosophical. What if there were extraterrestrial, terrestrial, or subterrestrial beings here running their version of a terrarium? And then some assholes come along in their ships, and they're like, ooh, there's gold. Ooh, there's diamonds. Ooh, there's uranium. Ooh, there's, whatever's on their grocery list. And they disrupt the terrarium. They disrupt, maybe the terrarium was an experiment. What plants will grow, what plants won't grow. The stuff that does grow, we can transplant it to another, place, planet, dimension, who knows. And that's something that a lot of ancient alien stuff talks about, in the sense of humans really are the aliens. We were either tinkered with, or, a proto-human species landed here, Antarctica or something, and, had a pretty good foothold, and then the younger Dryas came along and wiped everybody out, and they had to start again. I don't know. There's a lot to think about there. If I had some mushrooms or something, I'm sure I could wax on a little more about it. But last year I read an article where they said, I think it was bonobo chimpanzee, or bonobos and chimpanzees. I don't know if bonobos are a part of the chimpanzee family, but also chimpanzees had a 98.8% similarity, genetically speaking, in their DNA to humans. And so, what's going on with that, 1.2% that makes us so incredibly different? It's not so much the genetic structure that's different, but it's all of the encoding and the programming that turns off and on those genes, or delays them being turned off and on. But I also remember reading this article that because of that 1.2% difference in all the encoding and stuff that goes on, that still results in approximately 35 million different variations. And so apparently that's enough to make the difference between a chimpanzee and us. Peeling bananas with your feet, or, going to space. So to be so close and yet so far makes me wonder, if we have interlopers coming in, like Ancient Aliens talks about, with another 1,000 to 10,000 generations of science experiments and hopefully wisdom with them, that discovering, chimpanzees and tinkering, which is again all about Zecharia Sitchin and that stream. But again, it doesn't take much to kind of figure out that, okay, maybe they did come and tinker, and then there was Cro-Magnon. Let's tinker again. Well, there's Denisovan. Let's tinker again. Well, finally there's Homo sapien. So I think there's been a lot of interlopers, and there's been a lot of changes that are going on. And I think one aspect of that is, to me, painfully obvious, and yet no one seems to be paying attention, is the moon. The moon is the only body in the Milky Way that doesn't rotate. So you never see the dark side of the moon. So if you wanted a galactic, or at least a galaxy version of a duck blind, the moon would be a good thing for that. Now, shamans have talked about that. Woo-woo and wackadoo have talked about that. I thought it was an amusing thing until I remote viewed it. And it's a space junkyard. There are so many broken down buildings and ships and stuff just strewn all over the sides, like near the shadow. We'll make that another thing of me remote viewing the moon. But the point of it being is that I finally got the evidence that I needed that the moon didn't belong when, one, they sent a rocket into the moon and they hit it around 26,000 miles an hour. One, it rang for like a day and a half, as though it was hollow. And two, that impact should have created a crater much deeper. But as you notice on the moon, craters are never more than, X amount of feet deep. But buddy, are they wide. It's almost like it's a, gobstopper with a bunch of powdered sugar on it. Yeah, you can displace the sugar, but no matter how hard you hit that sucker, it doesn't break. The other thing too was the isotopic ratios. So I know that there was a thing a while back on the news, or on the History Channel, they talked about how all the moon rocks, not all the moon rocks, majority of the moon rocks disappeared. And that one NASA scientist took it upon himself to break into the storage facility, steal the entire safe that held all of the moon rocks from all of the explorations that we had on the moon. And still to this day, you are finding on the black market shards of moon rocks still out there being sold. So the conspiracy theory part of me was like, you had to get rid of the evidence. You had to hide the evidence that shows that the isotopic ratios, like for example, if I take a piece of gold from Earth and I take a piece of gold from the moon, that the isotopic or the isotopes, how they're arranged in the atom of gold itself is different. And so if the moon in theory came from the creation of the Earth, or something smacked the Earth and a chunk of it came flying off, it just doesn't belong here. It doesn't belong here. It doesn't spin. It doesn't have the same constituent components, and it fucking rang like a service bell. So why aren't we paying attention? But we can make duck lips on Facebook, Instagram, yada yada. So again, we're seeing that disassociation, we're seeing that breakdown, that demassification. And to kind of add on to the bonfire, we had all these bubbles that popped. Banking bubbles, real estate bubbles, too big to fail, energy bubbles, political corruption. The highest judges in the land have no idea how to apply the law to themselves. How many different religious systems do we have out there that are guilty of pedophilia at this point? Collapse of the education system. Sorry, I did it again. Man, I keep smacking the wire on this. My apologies. So again, we have the demassification of just breaking larger homogeneous groups into smaller and smaller decentralized groups so that we can divide and conquer, or that someone can divide and conquer. And it keeps getting reinforced in multiple, tangents. It's either mass media or social media or politics or public discord at this point. What if, to bring balance back to the terrarium, the original parties are behind the OBEs? I mean, if you're going to get hit by a truck and you disassociate from it, there's a good chance for people who have that technology to grab you, reprogram you, and put you back in your meat suit. Same thing with all those things from all those other subcategories that I talked about that are out-of-body experiences. And just from the near-death experience alone, they're presupposing that, easily 1 million people a year are having this kind of reboot, having their disc kind of wiped and reloaded. And if you look at how it's organized, that not everyone is super famous, but everyone has a sphere of influence. And so, kind of like Johnny Appleseed, you don't dump all the seeds in one spot and say, boy, this is going to be a hell of an orchard. A tornado can come through, or a hurricane, and that's the end of the orchard. And so you start splitting those seeds up and you cast them far and wide. And if you believe in panspermia, you realize that, these ETs or whatever, they've been doing this type of thing for a very, very long time, being measured in millennia. So, again, I don't have this all kind of figured out yet, but I wanted to share this because it's going to be a way for me to kind of frame my topic for next week. But again, I'm thinking more of a 100 level class for these folks. This is more 300 musings. There's some musings I still won't talk about unless it's one-on-one or, very small groups. Not so that I'm not ready to wave that freak flag just yet. But I mean, if I were one of these terrarium owners and I saw all this crap that's going on, I'm trying to rescue my experiment. Maybe I've been at this for, 10 to 50,000 years. I don't want to see my experiment wrecked. I don't want to start all over again. Or maybe that was part of the experiment, is to create a system and throw a bunch of variables at it and see if it can withstand the stresses. Material science, that's something they do quite a bit. But people, loneliness is as an all-time high. We are more connected through the internet, but less connected as human beings. And so there's a really good pulse that we can capture by scraping people's social media and building psych profiles and, just keeping a pulse on the masses and making sure people, like George Carlin said, we don't want you capable of critical thinking. We want you just smart enough to push the button and push the paperwork, but not smart enough to deploy critical thinking and realize that, I think he said, once you start realizing what's going on and have that critical thinking skills, you realize you're getting fucked in the ass by a big red, white, and blue dick. Boy, that Mayo's a genius. The other thing I look at too is I was thinking about the movie Pay It Forward, which where you had just like a node or one person, and they do 4 or 5 things for the 4 or 5 people, and then those people each do things. And again, it's that exponential curve of, it starts little, but if enough people keep doing it and buying into it and propagating it, then it becomes part of the zeitgeist. And we've seen samples of that where, I think it was Silva or TCM, Transcendental Meditation, back in the 70s, they noticed a correlation between heat and violence in Washington, D.C. And so they got a bunch of people to meditate on, calm and quiet and peacefulness. Not only did they see a break between that corollary of increased heat and increased incidence of violence, the decrease also continued long after the people stopped meditating. And so for a while it propagated into the zeitgeist. And so you wonder, if it was deployable in Washington, D.C., why couldn't we deploy that everywhere? If ands and buts. But I still think it's a way, again, to, if you grab 2 or 3 people and make them white lighters and drop them back in, whatever pools they swim in, whatever pebbles and ripples they can cause. And if you're also extra dimensional or ET and can be outside of time, you can see the butterfly effect and course correct. I wish I could do that with cooking. You get to the meal and it's like, oh, this got burned, or this tastes like ass. Well, just go back in time about 2 hours and start all over again until you get it right. And I think maybe there's some of that going on right now. But again, I think people just need to be brought together. The other thing that's, again, kind of in the conspiratorial silo, is that when people gather, you've all got cell phones on you. You all can be tracked by your cell phones, even if your cell phone is off, and even if the battery is out of it. Look it up. Unless you've got a Faraday cage on you or some sort of lead-lined pouch, or you start connecting with people outside of 3D reality. Imagine the Star Wars cantina scene where people from different groups and different places all gather, except it's done so in 4D. I've been to a place like that while remote viewing, and it's just like any other place in the world. There are good people and bad people, or more specifically, there are people who have intentions that are similar to us and people who have intentions that are dissimilar to us and what we would like. So I don't know if that necessarily makes them bad or good, so that's why I paraphrase it that way. But given what I'm seeing with this cadence of change and the future shock, and what I just went through myself, I'm seeing that there is going to be an increase in that dismassification and that deconnection, that uncoupling from humanity and our greater angels. And so we being the white lighters and the people that have these, OBEs, we may be that distribution node for help or hope or reintegration, or if we do find ourselves that we are in a new civilization, then defining the terms of that civilization, because a civilization is made up of the people that are in it. And so if we're going to rewrite humanity with an AI ML, let's rewrite it across the board, including other than 3D. And then let's see if that trickle-down economy works. Again, looking at what happened in Washington, D.C., and I think also in Philadelphia, they did an educational experience through Silva. Matriculation rates went from 50-60% to 90%, and it lasted longer than what the experiment actually took place in 3D reality. So there is an echo effect. So we don't all need to be in our little cisterns praying, 23 hours a day. Lynn McTaggart and the Power of Eight, I think, and the Intention Experiment kind of covered that as well. And if you really just want to go back, and I may PO some people with this, but I remember that there was a Bible quote where Jesus looks out at the crowd and says, these things and greater you will do if you come to know me. And I think the come to know me at a simplistic level is just to emulate the behaviors of this character named Jesus Christ, which may or may not be real because he closely identifies with Mithra, and I know how society likes to control, delete stuff. Real or not, the idea of Jesus Christ and the ideals that are represented therein, I think, are positive ones. And so to pivot away from the meat suit that may or may not have been Jesus of Galilee from the house of David, but look at the Christ consciousness. And the Christ consciousness is really a misnomer because it's been, again, like anything else in religion, it's been, pilfered from other places. Anytime you talk of Christ consciousness, you're talking about an extension of the self. You're talking about the disassociation. You're talking about your highest and greatest good, to have that maximum intellectual development as well as the emotional maturity to wield that intelligence, because that's where wisdom is. That's where that reach and grasp can travel together and be equally yoked. But I mean, Jainism, Hindu, Buddha, all of the Eastern religions have that mental construct of looking at the self and then having some sort of transcendental disassociative experience and realize that you are greater than the sum of your parts. You are greater than just yourself with a small s. You can become a much greater individual with the capital S, self. And so If Christ consciousness can be defined as a state of increased intellectual development and emotional maturity, look at the people who have had near-death experiences and spiritually transformative experiences. Look at those people that had their OBEs and tell me how many of them had an increase in intellectual development and an increase in emotional maturity. Nearly all of them, based upon my experience and the 200 plus case studies that I've, been able to dip my toe into and handed that off to Dr. Grayson. But anyway, it's one of those mental chew toys that it's been in and out of my brain all day today. And I think that people with more information, smarter than me, who have data to wrap around this, so it's not just my gut talking. Again, I just think if you reflect as a whole all the changes that happen to people who experience an OBE, they've made a personal leap towards the Christ consciousness. So then that begs the question, if all those ifs can be bought into, then it begs the question, why aren't things getting better? If so many people from so many different directions are having these new operating systems installed and being dropped back in place, why hasn't the world gotten better? I don't have an answer to that one. I'll have to chew on that one for a while. The other thing too is then, okay, here's really, that was a $64,000 question. This is the $1 million question. Who's doing this? I mean, extraterrestrials can physically abduct people and change them. I've also heard of abductions being happen in the energetic realm. Heard of people being, doing some remote viewing or astral projection, and they get scooped up. Who is doing the tinkering? Are ETs doing the tinkering? Angels? ET? I mean, if we're going outside of three-dimensional reality, ancestors, our future offspring. When you get outside of 3D reality and you get outside of truly evidential-based proofs, it really opens up the possibility to some really extraordinary possibilities. Maybe the cadence is being pushed because there's a timeline, and I'll just pull this one out of my left cheek. Say Planet X or Nibiru is starting to slingshot through again. Allegedly it comes through every 12,000 years or so, and if you've done any research at all, you know that the asteroid field was probably a planet, and that if you do all the math of everything that's moving and you cancel out the planets that we see, there's still something missing. But if you throw in a planetary body, I think they said it was 12 times the size of Earth. I don't know if it's the mass or the volume, I'm not sure. 12 times is what I see in my mind. But if you have a planetary body that's 12 times the size of Earth and it's about to slingshot through, it's going to it's going to rattle everyone's cage. And if there's ever been a time for people to be able to start thinking fourth dimensionally and realizing that there is more to the world than just what Newtonian physics can explain, we might have a chance. We might have a shot. So I'm still kind of wondering why. Why is the intervention necessary? Who screwed with the ecosystem? And who's trying to right the ship? It all boils down to us being pawns. And some people may feel uncomfortable with that. I am curious about it. I don't feel uncomfortable, but I'm curious about it. Because obviously we've been pawns for several thousands of years. And yet we're still allowed to progress. We're still, have some modicum of freedom of choice. And the experiment could have been ended a long time ago. And I don't know, is there an ending? Or is it something that just goes on and on? I'm not really sure. I don't have the answer to that question either. See, that's the thing with these great questions is they usually drum up more profound questions, and it's not as easy as paper or plastic. But anyway, so those are my musings for the evening. I have half a beverage and half a cigar to knock out, but I welcome any comments that you have to share, any experiences that you have kind of along this tangent, any thoughts you have along these tangents. Deeply appreciate it. The other thing that I think I'm going to do too is one of the things I did last time I had a gap in employment was I flexed my certification from Assist, the kind of like a peer, I forget exactly what they called it, a peer spiritual counselor, peer spiritual guidance counselor. Peer and counselor were involved because near-death experiencers are very much like soldiers who have PTSD, and the fact that soldiers will only talk with other soldiers. I don't have to explain how my buddy turned into red mist in front of my eyes. I can just tell you this happened. And you'll know, another soldier will know. And so we don't need to go into the gory or the deep or we don't have to probe the wound, but it allows us to at least talk about it and maybe work the edges and maybe do some healing on the edges and kind of either toughen up the scar tissue or make that wound just a little bit smaller. And so that was kind of what I was doing, is I was making myself available to people who had had near-death experiences or spiritually transformative experiences. One, giving them a platform in which to speak with no judgment. Two, to let them know about my pedigree and that I've done a lot of this stuff. And so I have a frame of reference. And so you don't need to explain. I got it. Three, having been through the experience, as well as having been an oncology nurse, having been through some death and dying issues personally as well as professionally, I believe I can offer suggestions and guidance without diagnosing, because that would be something that would challenge the validity of my nursing license. But at the same time, I believe I have enough skill sets over the past 46 years of experience that I can bring to the table to help other folks that are still trying to find their way. So that's the other chew toy I'm working on. My jaw's sore. I got a lot of chew toys I'm working on. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for paying attention. Please comment. I appreciate you. Have a great day.